It would not be Friday without a weapons-grade bullshit press release of the week. And dude, have I got one for you this week. Largest ever survey of Australian EV owners shoots down the range anxiety myth. Yes, range anxiety myth dead and buried. This is a real opportunity to look under the skirt and see how the media is routinely hijacked by vested interest groups so that their grubby agenda can be injected into your brain. I'm John Cadogan from AutoExpert.com.au and I get new cars cheap. I do, even EVs from time to time. Website. Card. Now, largest ever survey of Australian EV owners shoots down the range anxiety myth. I didn't know it was a myth. I've felt range anxiety. It didn't feel too mythical to me. This is a press release from MediaNet on behalf of the Electric Vehicle Council of Australia. Okay? And they do sound so virtuous. I will tell you what the EV Council of Australia tells you about it on its website. We are the national body representing the electric vehicle industry in Australia. I agree with that, they are. They're a lobby group, in other words, with a bunch of corporate members throwing money at them to push the barrow. Our mission is to drive investment and awareness to accelerate the electrification of transport. I even agree with that, and I even think it's worthwhile in some circumstances. In big cities, for example, we could reduce, whatever, one of those, possibly reduce. We could reduce air pollution, which kills a bunch of people prematurely and is definitely not good news. We could do our bit for energy security for the nation by having more EVs on hand. So that's all good. But they're doing it, allegedly, quote, for a more sustainable and prosperous Australia. And I don't see it. I really don't, dudes. You're not doing it for that reason. You're doing it because the grubby agenda of your members is to make money selling electric vehicle voodoo, like electric vehicles, charging stations, all of that stuff, or just some of these dudes who are members of this organisation, as far as I can see, they're just there paying their membership dues so they can say, look at how fucking green we are. That's reason enough. We'll get to that, okay? As the market is emerging in Australia, they say, our work is particularly aimed at increasing certainty for investment through policy. This is that reaching under the table with a minister kind of thing, right? Through policy, knowledge sharing and education. These fucking lobby groups all want to educate. As long as it's just the right kind of education that makes our members richer. So let's just drill down into who are these backers of this organisation. On their website, the Electric Vehicle Council will show you who the members are and who the board of directors are. And the board of directors here, big list of members, just here there's 90-ish of them, members, and there's a dozen board members, all right? So I just want to drill down into a few of them, and what I want you to ask yourself is that if you were running an organisation which was deeply altruistically committed to what the Electric Vehicle Council claims to be committed to, which is a more sustainable and prosperous Australia, to which we could give a hearty 2 thumbs up. You've got to say, if you went to seek.com.au and put an ad in the paper for 12 board members and you wanted various corporations to apply based on their altruism credentials, their ability to demonstrate sustainability and prosperity for Australia and elsewhere around the world, and you'd look at their environmental credentials as well, I suppose, and what they've done in the past. Let's have a look at some of the successful applicants in this case. And I make no imputation about the individuals. They're probably highly capable, respectable people. I'm talking about the organisations here because it's the organisations that pay them to stump up their seat at the table, okay? They want a seat at this table, these organisations. So let's look at some of the board members. We've got a spot on the board filled by the managing director of the Volkswagen Group in Australia, which I find intensely ironic. Some would say a violation of the law of conservation of irony, because 2015 happened. Dieselgate happened. Dieselgate was criminal, environmentally criminal, and also felony type criminal, at least in the United States, where Volkswagen pled guilty to criminal conspiracy and several other felony type charges. Their former chief executive officer, Martin Winterkorn, is under indictment in the United States, and he's not going to face trial, but only because Germany doesn't extradite its citizens to the United States for criminal proceedings, etc. Okay? So they're there. We've got News Corp. There's a seat at the table held by the Managing Director of News Corp in Australia. And if you looked at the CV of News Corp going back, 15 or 20 years, you could look at the fine work they've done there, stating their position over and over on climate change. And yet, there is a seat at the board for News Corp in this organisation which purports to be an advocate for a sustainable and prosperous Australia by promoting clean transportation, allegedly. We've also got Polestar. The managing director of Polestar in Australia has a seat at the table. Polestar's kind of largely irrelevant. They're a kind of fake Swedish, really Chinese manufactured EV, and they do anything for a press release, like anything, dude. That's amazing to me too, because in terms of traction and ability to make a difference, they're nowhere. We've got a seat for Origin Energy. The general manager of Origin Energy in Australia is a board member of the Electric Vehicle Council. And I find that amazing too, frankly, because if you took the hydrocarbons away from Origin Energy, it'd be like watching the biggest, most fuck-off explosion you've ever seen in a Michael Bay blockbuster, only played in reverse, right? Because Origin's core business is retailing hydrocarbon energy to punters like you and me, and also to industry. They do electricity and gas, and yet there's a seat at the board for them, and I can only assume they're there to look green. And all of those things I said about Origin Energy's seat could also be said for Ampol. Ampol's executive general manager, not just the general manager, dude, the executive general manager. He is a board member. Take the hydrocarbons out of Ampol, what would be left? It'd be like scuba diving and getting to the dry tank moment, wouldn't it? And then we've got SG Fleet, which is kind of interesting as well. I don't see SG Fleet having particular skin in the game of environmental altruism. What SG Fleet does is it reaches around under the table with various high-level executives at various companies and says, we can do all of that arduous fleet management for you, and as soon as they get the signature on all of that, then of course the process of bending over the employees to the maximum extent possible, like we're talking beyond the ankles, right? And this is not just SG Fleet, this is all fleet management companies. And I can only assume the skin in the game for these fleet managers, and there's more than one member in the fleet management game as well in the Electric Vehicle Council, is that the price premium for EVs means there's more finance to be written. And that means more profitability and, I guess, sustainability for the fleet managers. But I don't know that that translates to Australia. I'll give you some edited highlights of some of the other members, because these are really the agendas that are being, barrowed out here. We've got AGL, the coal and gas energy retailer. We've got Ateco, which is an importer of motor vehicles. We've got Audi Australia. We've got Ausgrid. We've got BMW Australia. We've got BP Australia. We've got Hyundai Motor Company Australia. Jaguar Land Rover Australia. Porsche Cars Australia. Scania Australia, the retailer of big fuck-off diesel trucks. We've got Super Cheap Auto, which is kind of curious to me as well, from the Super Retail Group. Isn't that interesting? Because EVs don't if you listen to some people, require any maintenance. Maybe they can sell some accessories, who knows. And then we got Custom Fleet, Daimler Truck and Bus, Delta Energy, Energy Queensland, Essential Energy, Linfox, Mercedes-Benz, National Automotive Leasing and Salary Packaging Association, NALSPA. Nissan is there, Origin Energy as discussed, Oryx, another fleet manager. We've got Transgrid and Transurban, the great government leech that is Transurban. We've got Valvoline, know what I mean. Volkswagen, Volvo Buses Australia, Volvo Car Australia, and Western Power. And this is what's really deeply at the core of the Electric Vehicle Council, right? These are the barrows that the Electric Vehicle Council is not just paid to push, but that's the reason why it is constituted. That's why it exists. That's who it is. These are the members. And I must have gone through roughly, I don't know, half to a third of the members there, right? They've all got this barrow to push, and it doesn't seem to me to be particularly oriented towards sustainability or prosperity for Australia. And I frankly wouldn't accept the membership of any of those organisations if that is altruistically what I wanted to achieve. So I think that is a flat out fucking absurd proposition to occupy. But that's just my personal opinion, obviously. Let's talk about this survey now, because in the media landscape, like if you've never worked in the media, dude, it's like this. They keep boning the editorial staff everywhere, and they keep extorting the vestigial staff to do more with less, right, over and over. So when a press release like this ill-conceived pile of shit lobs, it's got some quotes and some numbers and some stats and some bullet points, and you can just kind of cut and paste and tart it up a little bit, and there's your story. And the publisher's really happy because they see that as efficient, right? Doing more with less. Journo gets a pat on the head because a page goes up, you can run ads on the page, and the commercial model of the media is thus temporarily satisfied, okay? So here's what they say in their press release. Australia's largest ever survey of electric vehicle owners has found Tesla drivers are travelling the same average kilometres a year, they mean per year, as everyone else. What a surprise. In other news, also breathing the same air, driving on the same roads, and largely going from the same suburbs to the same other suburbs and back. Because that's what cars do, dude. And it's not electric vehicle owners, it's only Tesla drivers, right? So there's that. A survey of 741 Tesla drivers, let's not forget there's roughly 22,000 EVs on Australian roads, so not a particularly big proportional sample, I'd suggest, conducted by the Electric Vehicle Council, yes, and its members, and the Tesla Owners Club of Australia, shows that 89% drove more than 10,000 kilometres a year. Knock me down with a feather. While 38% exceeded 20,000 kilometres a year. 20,000 kilometres, of course, about 55 k's a day. 10,000 kilometres is about 27,500 a day. The national average, they say, for all passenger vehicles is 11,100 kilometres. That's absolutely correct. This can be confirmed at the Survey of Motor Vehicle Use, which is provided by the Bureau of Statistics. But I'd suggest that that latest data should be, in brackets, in a pandemic, because if you control for the pandemic, the average distance is more like just short of 15,000. Okay, they go on and say the vast majority of drivers charge their vehicles during off-peak times. Knock me down with a feather. Suggesting current market offers like time-of-use tariffs are working. Also suggesting that people charge their Teslas while they fucking sleep. The report also found, here's the bullet points, which are so good for short attention span journalists. 51% of Tesla drivers were aged between 50 and 69. So what does that mean? They're sort of late boomers and early Gen Xers, with just 12% under 40. And what that tells me is Teslas are expensive things, and therefore you have to be reasonably affluent to buy one. And the older you are, the more affluent you typically are. Like when you look at, last time I looked at this when it came to light, the average age of a Porsche 911 buyer is like 63 or something, okay? It's just, you've got to have a whole bunch of other boxes ticked before you buy that big, expensive, discretionary shit, basically. So knock me down with a feather there. Bullet point 2, Volkswagen and Toyota were the most commonly previously owned car before a Tesla, despite the leading EV brand being often considered luxury. There you go. A religion also. I'd put it to you that a significant proportion of Tesla owners are divorced from reality to the extent where their ownership is practically a religion. And, you know, their Christ is Elon Musk. So, Electric Jesus himself. Almost half of respondents saved more than $2,000 a year on petrol, while 77% saved more than $1,000. Where do you start with claims of this nature? Like, if it costs you $20,000 more for an EV, and then you start saying, well, I'm saving $2,000 a year on petrol, that's a pretty fucked position to start saving $2,000 a year, isn't it? It means that with everything else being equal, you have to own that car for 10 years to break fucking even. Like, come on, this spending 25 more, whatever, to buy a EV and then parroting this, what I'm saving on fuel, that's just ridiculous. It's a non-economically rational argument. That's the kindest I could ever be. Technology, 83%, and environment, 78%. So this is about 700 people and about 80% of them. So that's about 560 people said environment was the most common reason for buying a Tesla after technology, which was, you know, just slightly more, about the same numbers said technology and environment. And I'd suggest to you that, here's the thing, right? If you wanted somebody to convert to being a vegan, here's how I'd do it. I'd take them to an abattoir and conversion rates would just skyrocket, right? So if you wanted to explain to somebody how it's not entirely environmentally virtuous to buy an EV, right? Just take them to a lithium mine, okay? And take them to a lithium mine in a country that Donald Trump would categorise as, quote, a third world shithole, and see what they still think about the environmental virtue of their EV then. So people can have their reasons, but their reasons don't matter. The only thing that matters is reasons that you can argue for, that you can justify based on fact and logic, right? This is why parents do their kids a disservice when they say, oh, believe whatever you want. Don't fucking believe whatever you want. Believe only what you can argue for would be much better advice in my book, but what would I know? 65% did not have a regular servicing schedule, and 41% saved more than $1,000 on maintenance costs. Okay, so let me get this straight, because a lot of EV owners have this position where they say, my EV requires no maintenance, right? That would make it the only machine ever that can violate the second law of thermodynamics. That's a start. They're heavier than normal cars, meaning their tyres wear out sooner. And although they do regenerative braking, their brakes still wear out. Steering joints and suspension components are subjected to the same slings and arrows of use as those in your filthy, polluting internal combustion car. So EVs don't require engine oil and filter changes, but they've got dirty big heat exchangers for the inverter and the battery, and they're going to need maintenance because that's essentially exactly the same process as thermal management for an internal combustion engine and things of that nature. And I don't know where this saved more than $1,000 on maintenance comes from, because I've got a filthy CO2 belching Triton Ute just out there, and I get it serviced on time once a year. It cost me like $299. Anyway, I'd suggest that the maintenance saving, even if it is $1,000, and show me the mainstream car driven average kilometres that requires more than $1,000 in maintenance. I don't see it. It doesn't exist. Maybe if you've got a BMW or a Porsche or something like that, sure, okay, but premium everything costs more. We'll get into the quotes now. Electric Vehicle Council Chief Executive Behad Jafari said the study would be valuable for policymakers trying to boost Australia's uptake of EVs. Really? 741 people said. Quote, this study puts another nail in the coffin of the myth that driving range is an issue for EV owners, with the vast majority driving the same average kilometres a year as Australia's average passenger vehicle. We know range anxiety is a major impediment to people buying EVs. This finding is yet another reason showing there is nothing to fear. That's a Himalaya of horse shit, in my personal opinion. Here's why. If you only drove 55 k's a day on average, and that was what you did every day, and that was how your average was derived, okay, dude, but what about the average kind of car user who just does the local running around overwhelmingly, but let's just say 4 times a friggin' year, he makes the big trip, and it could only be like, I don't know, Sydney to Albury. To go from Sydney to Albury, or Melbourne to Albury, or Melbourne to Adelaide, or Adelaide to Melbourne, whatever, requires substantial planning. It just does, and it can fall over pretty quickly, as I found in the aftermath of the Kia EV6 launch when I had to drive from Canberra to Sydney. I left Hotel Realm, and all of the EV chargers at Hotel Realm had blown up inconveniently. So ultimately, I thought I'll charge up in Goulburn. So I get to Goulburn. 2 of the chargers in Goulburn near the Supermax, they're on the fritz, okay? One's got a black screen and it presents as if completely dysfunctional, kind of like trying to use your phone if the screen dies. And the other one is brown bread, okay? It is properly dead. And the third one is notionally free and operational, so I park there and I plug in, and I have 5 friggin' goes plugging in. And every time the plug goes in and the car tries to grab it, and it needs to grab and engage so that the charging interlock can be disabled and allow those big fat electrons to flow. And anyway, it has 5 cracks at that and fails to disengage with the plug. And I'm wriggling it around and doing everything I can to make this work, right? On the 5th go, it works, finally. But I've had my hands on the tools and I'm, eternally optimistic, and finally it friggin' worked. But it was a pain in the ass, and pro tip, I didn't own the car, so it wasn't all that stressful for me. I was just going to lock it and leave it there and hop a lift home and ring Kia and say, hey, if you want your car back, it's there. It's not the car that's defective, it's the worn plug on the charger, okay? But if I owned that car, I'd be stuck in Goulburn and I'd be unable to get home. And here we've got the CEO of the Electric Vehicle Council telling us that range anxiety is not a thing. It is. It is if you travel further than the range of your EV ever, right? It just is, because the infrastructure's not there, and it only takes 1 or 2 failures and you are stuck, dude. You're going to be finding a motel and plugging into a 10 amp plug for the next 20 hours or something. So not an unmitigated disaster, but range anxiety is alive and well and living just outside the city limits of every capital city in Australia. Mr. Jafari goes on and says EV owners are saving thousands of dollars on fuel and maintenance costs after they pay tens of thousands of dollars more for the vehicle. At a time when petrol and diesel prices are going through the roof, the Australian government must introduce long overdue fuel efficiency standards to cut costs in the future and drive down emissions. Only rich mother lovers can afford EVs. These are the people in society who are the least impacted by cost of living pressure, okay? That's just how this is. These comments, in my view, are only orchestrated to appease the needs of some of the members whose objective is just sell more cars, okay? Peter Thorne now, the president of the Tesla Owners Club of Australia, said that this survey is an excellent starting point for understanding Australia's Tesla drivers, or you could just go to the meetings, I suppose. He goes on and says, with just 12% of respondents aged under 40, there is the need to do more research to understand the preferences of younger drivers who may want to own an EV in the future. It's got nothing to do with preferences and everything to do with affluence. People under 40 are feeding the kids and trying to put them through university and paying off the mortgage and all of that stuff. They don't generally have the spare cash to splash on a Model S or a Model Y. How hard is this to understand, really? Tesla owners are saving thousands of dollars each year on fuel and maintenance costs. Oh, just drop it, will you? I mean, this is the kind of false logical proposition that gets sucked up by dumb journalists and regurgitated to the public, and then some bunny like me sees all of these inquiries about, I'm thinking about buying an EV to start saving money on fuel by spending $25,000 more up front, or by financing $25,000 more up front in an environment of rising interest rates. I mean, does that sound like a good fucking idea to you? Finally, we're calling on federal and state governments to take this research into account. Calling it research is a bit rich, isn't it? If I was a proper researcher, like a medical researcher trying to cure cancer, I mean, you don't cure cancer by calling 740 people and asking them how they feel. You don't get men to the moon by saying, the moon, how do you reckon we should get there, dude? 78% of respondents said we should just get a plane and put bigger engines on it, dude. Right? You don't do it that way. This isn't research. This is a survey to generate a press release. They're different things. To take this research into account when deciding EV policy, which is a crucial part of Australia's future. EV policy, right? Crucial part of Australia's future, just like health and infrastructure and the national debt and immigration policy and security and pandemic response and bushfire fighting and defence and our ageing population and how to manage that, and of course political corruption. If this is a spectrum, all of those things are up the important end, and EV policy is way down here under the rubric of fucking significant.